Welcome to Christ in Private Practice, the podcast for Christian counselors building bold, sustainable practices with Christ at the center. I'm Camille McDaniel, licensed professional counselor, here to offer faith-based support, business insight, and creative strategies to help you thrive. Let's grow, be encouraged, and take action together. Welcome back to Christ in Private Practice. It's wonderful to have you here. We're going to be talking a little bit today about some things that have just been going on recently for the field of mental health, for state laws, and for Christian clinicians. And then we're just going to talk about what's to come. So recently, many Christian counselors may have been paying attention to the state of Oregon and a case that was involving a Christian counselor, a licensed Christian counselor who was over there, and the decision that the state of Oregon made to drop a substantial fine that they had against this counselor. And that was actually based upon, from what I read, some legal developments that occurred with regards to a case in Colorado with a Christian clinician, another Christian clinician. Now, before I go any further, I'm not really going into spending a ton of time on those two cases, but if you desire, you can look up the Christian counselor in Colorado Supreme Court. That should pull up one of the cases, and Christian clinician, state of Oregon. And I believe the fine that the state of Oregon placed on this Christian clinician was close to $90,000. So if you look up state of Oregon Christian clinician fine for $90,000, you can definitely go into more detail about what occurred in that case as well. What I do want to discuss, though, is what these situations, what these cases really reveal about our profession, and why I believe that Christian counselors need both training. We need training in everything from ethics to documentation to treatment modalities, just everything as it relates to faith integration. And we also need community now more than ever, I believe, because if I'm really honest, I think that the bigger issue, it's not so much the court cases themselves. I think that the bigger issue happens between counselors when these topics come up for us within our counseling practices. So for those who may not be very familiar, just so that I can kind of like lay a foundation of what I'm talking about, the case with regards to the clinician, the licensed clinician in Oregon. There was a licensed clinician who was disciplined by the state of Oregon, by their licensing board, actually, after a long-term client that they had, which I believe they may have been seeing this client for about 2 years or so. But however it unfolded, the client asked the clinician to personally affirm their same-sex relationship. Now, according to the reports, the counselor had, before kind of gently discussed or gently tried to reroute the client away from that counselor giving any kind of personal affirmations or just bringing in the personal into it. But it seems as though during a session that this counselor had with their client, the client was just, very straightforward about the question that they had in wanting the counselor to give them an answer about how they felt about their relationship with the other person that was in their life. And after, I guess, some prompting, the clinician eventually shared that he could not personally affirm the relationship just because of his religious beliefs. And the licensing board for the state of Oregon concluded that his response violated ethical standards, and then they imposed the disciplinary action on him. I believe he had to
take some sensitivity courses, I think some other culturally related courses. And then there was the fine of almost $90,000 that was placed on him. There is a law office that the name of it is not coming to my mind right away, but you will see if you look up the case, who he's being defended by, or I don't know if it's just ongoing defense, especially since things have been dropped. But I know the court ruling from Colorado actually influenced the state of Oregon to withdraw the disciplinary action as well as the fine that they had laid against this clinician, this licensed clinician who was also a Christian. Now, no matter what you personally feel about that case, no matter what you professionally feel or culturally feel or even theologically feel, I think that many counselors can agree that this case raises a lot of important questions about counselors' speech and ethics, and even questions about client autonomy and values and faith. What happens when a client asks you, directly for your personal perspective? What happens if the client, directly asks you how you feel about them or their life or their worldview or any of that? And how do we navigate these situations, like, well, how do we navigate them ethically? How do we navigate them professionally, overall? So again, whether or not you've ever faced a situation exactly like this one, I would say that many counselors have encountered different moments in their career where a client's goals or their belief system or their worldview, created some kind of complexity within the counseling room. And that's where I think the real conversation lies. I think the real conversation lies with how much support do you feel you have when those complexities come your way? Do you feel you have a place to turn and talk freely and not feel like you're being judged, to really just kind of make sure that you are doing the best thing that is going to be good for your client, good for yourself, good for everyone involved? I actually had not too long ago an opportunity. I mean, really, this was just like recently, an opportunity to kind of broach a little bit of this type of conversation online with another professional, I believe mental health professional. So this was on a social media page where I only have a business for this particular page. All of my pages, actually, all of my social media pages are regarding mental health and business. I think less than 1% of the people that I'm connected to on most social media platforms are family and friends. I mean, less than 1%, really. So I typically, this is a way for me to be able to keep people aware of what's going on in the counseling practice, what's going on for Christ in private practice. So when this person's, post started coming through my feed, I was just kind of noticing some of the things that were being shared, but my mind is thinking about it clinically. So I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And then I got like a couple more posts, and I actually don't even recall who the individual is, but sometimes you link to people and you friend people and you kind of connect on whatever social media platform it is. And you may not remember exactly who they are, and you may not actually even know them very closely, but you all may be in the same field. And at one point in time, you thought it was a good idea, so you connected. And that was the case with this. I didn't remember the individual very well, but at some point in time, we must have connected on this platform. And they had a post that came through my feed that kind of brought up a lot of good questions that I thought, oh, the field of mental health just really doesn't talk about a lot. And their post said something along the lines of, hey, straight people, how much therapy would it take for you to become gay? And then it said, exactly. So why are you supporting conversion therapy? And that was kind of the point of it, to just really kind of bring awareness and to voice voice their view through this post that they were reposting, how they felt about that. And I'm very aware that that form of therapy, generally, when you actually look into more information about it, you will see that there's a lot of deep wounds attached to it that people will talk about as far as their lived experiences. A lot of that, though, was actually not done within the field of mental health by licensed professionals. A lot of that can be linked to experiences people had within faith-based settings, So, but either way, it draws a lot of serious emotion and serious feeling. But for myself, one of the things that I had noted, in addition to just knowing the background of some of the practices that were unethical, some of the practices that were very traumatizing and harmful to people, I'm also aware of other things that were coming through my timeline around the same time that actually brought up some good thoughts in my mind surrounding that whole topic. And so I mentioned to the person who actually posted it, or I at least typed a comment back, that I didn't know if the field of mental health was ready for these types of conversations because, there are some realities that don't really fit very neatly into this topic of discussion. And what was actually popping up in my mind as I was writing that were some posts that had also come through my feed regarding individuals who have platforms. There were like, oh gosh, there were maybe like 10 or 11 individuals who all have platforms sharing their journey. And their journey was about their own conversion in a sense. So it wasn't a conversion related to them getting counseling, not that type of conversion therapy that is generally associated with minors, but these were adults talking about their own conversion out of same-sex attraction, and their platform is just speaking about their experiences and their turn to faith, and they just share their stories. All of them have different stories, different platforms. Maybe some of them have overlapping audiences, but I think what I took away from those two different posts that were coming through my timeline was, there are also a subset of individuals who have experiences with same-sex attraction, and they're telling their journey and their stories, and they are choosing to move away from acting on same-sex attraction, and they're talking about it. But I don't hear anything about those individuals in mental health spaces. I know that those individuals do have platforms and, like I said, communities, and they have it on a lot of online spaces. You could just kind of Google it, honestly, and you can find information in threads where people are asking each other questions or looking for support. And so they kind of have developed their own support teams and networks and all of that. But I wondered, what does that mean for the field of mental health, and how would other individuals take that? So I started to, converse about that. And I just was sharing with them that I didn't know if the field of mental health was ready for that, because there are some individuals who have opposite experiences, who are adults and who are desiring something different for their life that may not go along the narrative that we're used to hearing about. And they may be doing this for faith-based reasons or for other reasons, and no one's forcing them, no one's coercing them. They are making their own personal decision that they want to align their life with their value systems, their convictions. And so what about the support for those individuals? And the reason why I said that was because there's a lot that goes on online. How many people are online? How many people are like, I don't want to go online? Okay. There's a lot going on online. But in a group that I belong to, for mental health professionals, there was a post that came up where someone was looking for a referral. And the referral had to do with somebody who was looking for a counselor who could provide their their same faith, and it was Christian faith. And so they were looking for somebody who was of their faith, Christian faith, that could provide some counseling that integrated their Christian faith into their counseling experience. And they were wanting to explore the fact that they wanted to better align their life with their faith. And that involved looking at how they might process and start to proceed with moving forward and moving away from acting on same sex attractions. And it was very interesting because that actually is the only time I've ever seen that type of referral or request for referral come up ever. Once I did have in my practice somebody call and wanted counseling care for that very topic. And I was not in network with their insurance and they really wanted to use their insurance. So they continued to move on. But one of the things that I noted when I was on or in this online group was that after the person posed the question, people stayed polite, people stayed professional. They definitely did. I must say that, at least what I witnessed. I don't know. I didn't stay there for all the comments. But I noticed that a lot of the mental health professionals were having a really hard time providing the information that was being asked. Instead, they were giving suggestions that would encourage the original poster to tell that person that maybe they need to really go back and rethink what they're wanting and rethink, how they got to this conclusion and maybe consider like there were book referrals or suggestions that really were going to talk to why it really was okay to lean into the thing that they said they did not want to lean into. It was really okay. And so I found that really interesting because I was like, oh, here's a rub here. This is a rub. You have somebody who is an adult who is saying very clearly, this is what I'm looking for, but then you also have a group of mental health professionals who are like, this is not what I think they should be looking for. So I was just having a small conversation about all of that, in this online under this online post that came through my wall. And I found it was very interesting that the person that was speaking back and forth with me, I mean, they remained very professional, but they noted, oh, that's very interesting, when I was sharing with them just that fact. And then they said, but I understand that and that's very interesting, but I don't think that that would be anything that I would do in my practice. And that to me was interesting because we oftentimes talk about honoring client autonomy. And we know that our code of ethics for multiple licenses in the United States and even Canada talks about not only client autonomy, but respecting client beliefs and just being able to acknowledge where those beliefs are important and valuable to them. And so we can talk about honoring client autonomy and we can talk about how, we should be aware of the cultural differences and all of that. But what happens when the client's goals differ from what you hold as far as convictions for your life? And so, that's something that I found really interesting because oftentimes I do see where Christians are sometimes getting, I don't I wanna say getting ragged on a little bit or there are just some strong feelings about being able to have your Christian faith integrated into a counseling practice or having your Christian faith integrated into your business. People still do feel strongly about that should not be the case, even in our field of mental health. And so it's important for I think all of us because I see that even if you're not a person of faith, sometimes people feel strongly about things they don't believe they should do in their practices, right? And it's not regarding faith at all. And so I think that goes back to us being able to have a conversation about what happens when your convictions don't align with what a potential client or a client is coming to see you for. How do you address that? And what do we do when those things pop up? And I know I've talked about that in this podcast. I've talked about that with other individuals, but I just found that experience online was pretty interesting. And it made me kind of think about some of the things that we wrestle with in the field of mental health, and also made me think about, does client autonomy only matter when we agree? So it's a lot to think about, and I think a lot to cause us to have to be very clear on our policies, on how we practice, why we practice, what we practice, just so that we can be clear and sure to remain ethical and professional, and compassionate in whatever we are doing, because it definitely can get tested along the way. And I think, and I know these conversations can be a little difficult. Now, during this online interaction, you know, it had me thinking about how hard it must be to really put some of your own thoughts and feelings aside and to engage in these conversations and acknowledge that that you do have a worldview and that your worldview actually influences who you can see and how you see people and what you specialize in, and all of that. Yeah, because every clinician has boundaries. Every clinician has populations that they specialize in working with, or populations that they don't feel comfortable working with, and every clinician has situations that are going to just fall outside their area of competence, right? Or comfort. And we know that sometimes this is something that is related to Christian counselors, but it's true for all counselors. It's true for everyone. It's true for the secular counselor. It's true for other faiths. It's true for everyone that we have to acknowledge that boundaries do exist. Worldviews do exist. And the question is not whether or not we can discuss those boundaries honestly and respectfully amongst ourselves in the profession or with our clients, but we need to check and make sure that our profession can do it well. And that we, being a part of the profession, are having these conversations and making these decisions well informed of our code of ethics, well informed of our state laws, just well informed. And that brings me back to the Oregon case. For many Christian counselors, the concern is not simply legal concern, but it is a concern of professionalism and ethics, and wondering whether or not there is room in this profession for thoughtful, ethical Christians, who take both their faith and their ethical obligations very seriously. And I think, sometimes the fear or the serious concern is wondering whether just asking questions will cause people to assume the worst about you. And that's very real. It feels like you have to kind of remain silent sometimes to avoid conflict. And, if you've ever felt that way, you're not alone. You're not alone. What I have discovered over time is that many Christian counselors, they're not looking for all that back and forth online. They really want to be peaceful. They really just want to practice. They just want to practice in accordance also with their convictions, and they just want peace. They are looking for guidance. They are looking for wisdom. And they're looking for people who understand the complexity of practicing in accordance with your faith beliefs. And some questions that pop up are like, how do I do all of this ethically? How do I navigate this when I have to document this in my notes? How do I, stay within my scope of practice and integrate my faith appropriately at the right times? All of these things pop up really, they're not always the simplest of questions that come up. But I do think that they definitely deserve more than just a conversation on a social media platform, right? It's squeezed into a section, and hoping people don't get too angry with each other, and typing anonymously and typing, things that are not very kind. And, we deserve to be able to have really thoughtful discussions in a safe place, in a professional and ethical and faith filled way. That's what we really do. That's how we grow, really. And, and with that comes like the exciting news that I said I was going to talk about last week, but really All of that and more are reasons why I am really excited about launching the summer series through Christ in private practice. Happy summer. Yeah, it's like what, the second day of summer? So, what's going to happen is that over the next 2 months, starting with next week's episode, episode 92, over the next 2 months, we're going to be diving into topics that are related to faith integration and ethics and, documentation, spiritual assessment. We're going to be going over complex clinical situations and evidence based care, all of that and much more. There's going to be a topic every week, and each topic is like a mini training. It's going to be approved for one continuing education credit, every single one. And so, those who are listening to the podcast at the end of this 2 month period, you will have 8 continuing education hours through this summer series that you can definitely go on Christ in Private Practice platform, and you can go and purchase CEUs or excuse me, continuing education hours if that's what you desire to do with after you've listened to the training. But even beyond the continuing education credits, my goal is to really help Christian counselors to develop just, this the competence needed to stand really firm in providing faith integrated care. Because it's important for us to know how we are going to hold on to our convictions and provide strong clinical skills, but also align ourselves with our code of ethics. And it's definitely doable. So we're going to have, along with the podcast, having a summer series that is going to be like a training broken up into 8 sections over the course of 8 weeks. That is going to be one part, but then there's going to be another component that's going to be released at the same time, and it's going to be the faith integration consultation circle, because education is important, but community matters as well. And some of the most meaningful growth takes place when clinicians of all seasons come together to work through difficult questions, sensitive topics, not attacking one another, not arguing with one another, no proving who's right, who's wrong. But we are literally here, iron sharpening iron, coming with the light of Christ to come together ethically and professionally to learn, to consult, to support one another, and to grow. And we definitely will wrestle with complex topics, but we'll wrestle together and we will seek wisdom, and we're going to seek it together. And I wanted to create this place where Christian counselors can bring questions and discuss their cases ethically and learn from one another and have conversations that are often, I would say, difficult to have, difficult to be very transparent about, because many Christian clinicians, they feel isolated. And I know we do have spaces online, but we don't always have a lot of places where we just talk freely and consult on cases. And so, isolation is not a healthy place that we want to kind of be in when we have difficult clinical and faith filled questions. And so we are definitely going to have a space, a safe space where you can come and you can grow and you can consult on client cases that you have. And we're actually opening the doors to the faith integration consultation circle today. So we open the doors on the faith integration consultation circle today, and then next week starts our summer faith series and training for continuing education credit, if that's what you want. So, as a profession, we're going to continue to wrestle with difficult topics, and my hope is that we become known for something different. We want to be known not for the hostility and fear of what's going to happen and what state legislation is going to do and what they might, bring down on us, but we want to be known for our clinical excellence, our humility, our compassion, our wisdom, our respect for client autonomy, our ability to hold on to our convictions, our commitment to ethical practice, and just, a willingness to engage in difficult conversations thoughtfully. So, the Oregon case made headlines, but I think the deeper question remains, how do we faithfully and ethically serve clients in an increasingly complex world? And if you'd like to join us for the Summer Faith Integration series, or if you would like to learn more about the Faith Integration Consultation Circle, then registration information is now available through Christ in Private Practice. I will also put a link below in the show notes. And if you are listening on Spotify or Apple, I would also have a link there for you too. Thank you again for joining me for another episode and listening today. And as always, let's continue to build our practices and serve those who are sent our way God's way. Until we meet again, God bless.